We're good? Okay. All right. So today I am going to talk to you about classes in Corinna and Camelia, aka Raku. But get nice 3 letters, C's in a row if I call it Camelia. If anything in this talk is wrong or missing, it's Ruth's fault. I was supposed to present this tomorrow, giving me a little bit more time to prepare for it and talk with people and make sure double check, especially on the Perl bits that I'm not quite as feel strong on. But then she moved me to today. So because you're the absolute worst. I am the worst. So the absolute worst. No. All right. Anyway, so my goal here is really just to talk a little bit about how classes work in both of these 2 different systems. Because now we've got Corinna is coming into Perl bit by bit. That should have been the next slide. So that's our goal today. We're going to talk about classes. So we'll start by going over kind of the history of classes and object-oriented stuff in Perl. We'll go initially from the Dark Ages. So what do we have for OOP in Perl 0? Well, if you go to Perl Hist in Perl Doc, this is the description of Perl version 0. It just says classified. Don't ask. So I don't know. I guess if any of y'all work at NASA, maybe you can find out and let us know what's in there. But or JPL, I guess technically, right? JPL is where he was at. Then we get to Perl 1. No, don't have anything. Perl 2. Nothing. Anyone want to take a guess for Perl 3? Nope, nothing. What about 4? Nope. We actually had to double check this one because there was some memories of people, we weren't quite sure when the 4 to 5, when anything started happening. Some people thought that ties maybe happened in 4, and we double checked. No, 4 is nothing. Okay. Then we finally get to having something in version 5. And so here's just a very quick little example of what something might look like. So I made a little line class here. With 2 X's, 2 Y values. And again, I think most everybody here can read this. We've all seen this type of stuff before, and we shift in all of our values, get them set. And really, the key working here is that bless, right? And all we're really doing, it's really simple. We're just saying, here's some data, and we're going to associate it with this other package. And we're just going to sort of combine the 2 some way. It's really simple, but it worked. Right? And everything was just kind of put together in this nice little package, and then you had to put a 1 just bottom because, right? I know there's a reason for it, but it's still funny that we have to do it. And then, do what? Didn't have to be a 1. Could have been anything not a 0. Right? So, and then to use it, right, we would say, okay, use our package, and then we could say, okay, new, put in whatever we wanted, and then everything would work. And we got this little arrow syntax that all it was really doing is giving us that package, throwing that into it. So then, right, this has all been brewing. People are using it. And I'm going to now jump a little bit outside of Perl. Well, kind of outside of Perl. And we start then looking at Perl 6. Okay? And again, this is what's interesting for me is in my memory, this didn't happen yet as I was planning out my original one. And then I was double checking in all the history docs, looking at the time, stamps for everything. And I realized, nope, actually this happened first. So there were lots of RFCs. Everybody was doing the proposals. They said, this is what we have right now in Perl, but this is what we want. We've all been using Java. We've been using Lisp. We've been using all these other things. And they've got all these different great systems. And this is how we think Perl can implement all of it. And, the RFCs for Perl 6 was the time to just basically ask for everything in the kitchen sink. See lots of people back there laughing. And, that's, if you go back and look at those RFCs, people ask for some very strange things. They also ask for some very smart things. And one of the RFCs is RFC 137. Anyone want to take a guess who wrote it? Of course it was Damien, right? Right? But he had some interesting comments about what OO should look like and kind of the class model should look like. And first off, he said it should not be fundamentally changed. But he did recognize that there were some issues, right? We didn't have lots of encapsulation, right? There weren't these hierarchical method calls, single dispatch, not great compile time check, all these other things. And he mentioned one thing that I think as we start talking later about Corinna, you'll notice is a thing. Ovid's talked a lot about this as well, but he says the non-prescriptive, non-prescriptive, non-proscriptive nature of Perl's OO model makes it possible to construct an enormous range of OO systems within the one language, right? And, you know, again, we saw that it was so simple, right? All we do, here's a data, piece of data, and then here's a package, and we will wed the two of them together. Everyone was going off doing their own thing, coming up with different systems, because this is what works best for me, this is what works best for our company. Somebody else was doing the same thing at the same time, right? We didn't have quite as fast communications back then. I guess we kind of did a little bit, whatever. So people started coming up with some ideas. What should this Perl 6 look like? And they were thinking about it for a while, and some more while, and some more while. And people were like, okay, but like, why are we waiting? Okay, we still have Perl 5, we can still work with this. And so people started coming up with some modules that would do a lot of those things that people were saying we wanted in Perl 6, and they're like, but we can have it today. We can just make some modules and we'll get it. And so the sort of, I think the main one, and again, history people, please correct me again. Like I said, if I get any of this wrong, it's whose fault? Ruth, yeah, okay. But class MOP kind of paved the way forward and kind of landed on this class attribute method instance, like core bit. But it was based on the work for pugs, which was designed for Perl 6. And this is now getting all the ideas that were floating around, still being solidified for Perl 6, came back into Perl 5. And based on this work, we ended up with what? Moose. So here we have Moose, and that same little program of a line with a couple of attribute x1, y1, x2, y2, whatever, and a couple of things. Doesn't look. Wait, this is my Moose code. Oh wait, there we go. Wait. Deleted one. So I deleted a slide somewhere. It was Ruth's fault. Okay. Then we had Moose X declare. We'll just skip there, right? Which basically just gave us this nice little like class word to go in there. And of course, I think Moose X right now is deprecated, right? No. Yeah, somewhere. Yeah. Okay. But this, I'm using this more just to kind of show maybe where we're thinking about going, because it's going to show us that. But of course, there were a lot of other systems. We had from Moose, we had Mouse, and then to Moo, and then to Mo, and then to M. There was nothing else after that, right? You can't do what? Yeah. Class Tiny, Mars, Gloom, Might, and I think somebody I found, I don't know, the count came up to what, 70-something different systems that people had come up with. That's a lot of different ones. Obviously, most people were using Moose, but there are people who had very good reasons in different use cases to use something else. So, thinking about all this that's going on now in Perl 5, lots and lots of different ideas being thrown in, lots of systems being used in production systems. We're going to now get to the point that Perl 6 is finally starting to come around to something usable. And so what would that look like? Well, like this. And honestly, if you've used Raku, this should be pretty familiar to you. But even if you haven't, if you used moosex declare, it should still look pretty similar to you. If I put the two of them side by side, all that's really happened here is that ISA and is read write have just kind of been integrated a little bit more into the syntax, right? And otherwise, and we don't have to do that self with the arrow and everything. That verbosity has now been reduced down, simplified a little bit. But otherwise, it's basically what we were already seeing in Perl. And what did Damien say? He said fundamentally it really shouldn't be changed. And that's kind of what we've ended up with. The syntax might be a little different, but at the core, it's still kind of all working the same. So how does this work, right? In Raku, right, we have our class. I'm just going to give you a quick little overview of the Raku one for those of you who don't know, because I know most everyone here is more Perl folk. We got our list of attributes, right? Then we've got my method there. I can reference those variables directly by using the $dot or $bang. And then what's interesting here, though, again, we were talking about that meta object protocol that was kind of also floating, and we were talking to other people, and they said that was a lot of what was going on in the thought process of coming up with how the Perl 6 system was going to work, and then how Moose was going to work. All this was floating around. And in Raku, if you ever want to have some fun, is you can go and say class.how for the higher order workings. But also just how, because we like to have all these with question words. So you say dot what, say what class it is, dot where is like where it is in memory, dot which for an identifier, and dot how. There's also a dot wherefore and dot why, because we have to complete it all out. But in this case, we get Perl 6 meta model class how, right? And so this is our meta object that's working to define our class. And it's got a lot of different methods that go along with it. And these are all the things that are happening in the background to take what we've got here and make it all function as a class. There's a lot of them. Okay? Can I skip? Oh, wait, crap, I can't skip that. Okay. So if I want to, all the other things that we can do in here, right, you can just really quickly see I've got my types. I can add in some traits. And I've got some variables that I can do for setup. We've got our methods, and we've got some other different methods, special ones, build, tweak, and destroy, and we can do some private methods. Hopefully that, as a very, very quick overview, makes sense for most people, yes? Okay. How many of y'all have used Raku at this point? Like a handful of them. Okay. All right. Now, enter Corinna, or Core, it originally was called, and then people got mad at him. Or I don't know if he, or is that self-change? Does anybody know? He was asked to change? Okay, yeah, from Core to Corinna. It's still very much under development, right? Ovid was our main champion for this one. Damien gave a lot of the input for it. All of the implementation is being done by Leonard, right? And why? Well, object-oriented, it works in Perl, right? I mean, clearly it has for a while. But it's not entirely intuitive to modern programmers, particularly those who are coming over from other languages, right? Again, that's not to say that how it was doing it was wrong or unintuitive given what we had at the time, but you know, if we're trying to get new programmers in and they're coming from Java, they're coming from C, they're coming from Python, that whole idea of just here's some data and here's a package and we're going to marry the two doesn't kind of work for their thought process. And as he said, it's suffering the Lisp curse. As we go back to that list of all the different versions that we've got for creating, you know, sort of class systems in Perl, there's not just one solidified one. So maybe company A is using one package. That means their programmers aren't necessarily going to be able to just jump over to company B who's using a different one. And maybe company C has their own custom one that they haven't even published out onto CPAN for other people to know even how it works. And so in this case, it sometimes is better to have one that is standardized. And for me, coming on I do a lot of internationalization type stuff. So I think about like working with Unicode. If you're in C and you're having to figure out which Unicode library am I going to use? If this string munging library is using this type of Unicode, you know, class or, you know, structure, whatever, and this one is using a different one, now I've got to create a bridge between the two of them. And that's not fun. I want to just have everything work. So when we get into more modern languages like Raku or JavaScript, the Unicode just works, right? And I don't have to think, wait, which version, which type of Unicode class am I using? I just use it and it works, and any string library will work with it. And so I think that was a lot of the goals here. The other one, I thought this was a really interesting one. He says, good enough is not good enough, right? He wants to ensure that whatever is there is exactly what we need, not just a like, oh, that's a nice effort, right? Really wants to make sure that what's there is what Perl needs. And also goes with the principle of going small now and expanding later. And this is another one that I think is important to think about when diving into Corinna, because when you look onto like Reddit, and Reddit's such a great spot for positivity sometimes, and you hear people talk about Corinna, and it was interesting, I would see some of these posts, and they're like, well, it doesn't have this. Well, it doesn't have that. Well, it doesn't do it this way. Well, why can't it do this? Why can't it? And I'll get into some of those others later on in this presentation. But basically what we said is, well, if we start off too big, then maybe we're leaving too many promises. And as much as you say something is experimental and should not be used in production code, yeah, somebody's going to use that in production code. And then when you say, you know what, this just isn't working like we want it to do, and now we need to pull it out. Which is the one I'm trying to think of that took how many versions to get out of Perl finally? Smart matching, yes, that was it, right? Smart matching, because how many people started depending on it, said, well, no, but I want to keep it in. It was working just fine for me. I liked how that one worked. And yeah, how many versions did it end up taking to get rid of?
It's still there.
Wait, I thought it got out. I rest my case. Sorry. Yeah, it finally got pulled out and then had to get put back in. Okay. Okay. So, case in point there, right? So no matter what, if you put it as experimental, someone will depend upon it, and then you're probably going to be stuck with it. So the way that Ovid looks at it is, okay, better to do the smallest amount, but do it exactly correctly. And then as we realize we need more things or we need to do different things, then we can slowly start implementing those, and then we're not having to deal with all of that baggage, that experimental baggage that's not really experimental anymore. So a quick little example here from going from Moose to Corinna, right? We've got our class point. Instead of saying package, now we just say our class. We have field. If you look at some of the older code, and this is certainly one thing I was finding as I was going through this presentation, you see various versions of Corinna along the way. For a very long time, he was still using has instead of field, but now in the final version, it's field for our little bits. And you got some different attributes for that field. We got our method. And we can also do some inheritance, which actually I think now is supposed to have a colon. That's another mistake. Thank you, Ruth. In there. But I think the main thing that we get out of this is all the same functionality is there that we had in Moose, right? There's no different functionality here. It's just a lot cleaner, right? We don't have as much text. There's not as much line noise. And, that's unfortunately one of the historical baggage of all the code golf competitions of Perl, is that people accuse Perl of having lots of line noise. Doesn't have to, right? We've all seen good, well-written Perl code, right? But I think if somebody's an 18-year-old coming out of college, looking at that bit on the left, they're thinking line noise, right? Rightfully or wrong. Again, we all know why that background is there and why it's being done the way it's being done. But that's not how younger people are looking at it, or people who are coming from other languages. But for me, being the more Raku guy, I'm like, oh yeah, that looks like we have in Raku. And again, there shouldn't be any surprise about that, right? We've already seen there's been lots of cross-pollination between the two, and it's not one-directional, right? It's gone back and forth. And as you can see, right, we've got here, it's going to be a read-write variable. We're going to make sure we have to have it. And the methods look pretty much the same. The only difference is that little twidgel that we have in Raku, because we like those. Some of our basics here that we're going to do with Corinna, right? We've got the combination we're going to have. Corinna is base available, right? 54.0, right? 538. Oh, I'm off by a version. Again, thank you, Ruth. But what I want to do with this presentation is kind of show the two different systems and kind of go over them. So if you're familiar with one, you can get familiar with the other one. Okay? So our field and attributes, again, all Corinna does is call it a field, right? In Raku, we have a has, right? And this is just a different scoping mechanism that we're using in Raku, right? So we have a my scope and our scope, and the has means it just goes with each instance, gets a new copy of it. And we do have our twidgel there. But if they're just there, like this A here, it's just available within the class, but that's it. Nothing really is happening to it otherwise. It might be useful if we could read it from the outside. And in Raku, what we do, if we want to make our life really easy, we put a dot instead of the bang, and it will automatically create this method for us. We don't have to specify it, right? It's like a getter in other languages. In Corinna, you just add on that colon reader, and it will do the same thing. It will automatically provide you that reading method, so you don't have to write it. But that would be what the equivalent is if you wanted to be verbose about it. And then, right, we can just read it like that. Notice no more having to put our braces in, quotation mark, anything like that, right? Just nice, simple arrow. Or in Raku with a dot, because we wanted to go with the dot, I guess. Okay? Then, if you wanted to, you could add in your own method name. If you don't want to just repeat that, if you're one of those people that likes to add on the get set in your names for those, you can do that, and you just put it in parentheses. We don't actually have equivalent for this in Raku. If you want to do that in Raku, you need to actually manually specify out that method name. And you just make the variable with the bang, so you doesn't have that auto-created, and then you can provide it. Simple enough if you want it. But let's say we also want to write into it. Okay? Well, in Corinna, then you add on the writer. And in Raku, we would add is read write. Because by default, in Raku, all the stuff from the outside doesn't touch it. All I can do is at best read it. We'd like to keep things as encapsulated and private as possible. And that's also a goal with Corinna. Right? And this is basically what those are doing. By adding in that reader and writer, we're getting our method C, just returns, ignore that new there. It just returns C. And then it adds, the new method is set underscore C. And I think you said that was Paul was the one that pushed for that one. Oh, okay, yeah, fair. So implementer's choice. But it will add on that set by default. Whereas in Raku, it's a little bit different. And you can see this is again where that functionality does change a little bit. We instead return effectively a proxy, which then allows you to do a fetch, which just gives you the value of it, or a store, which means if you have this on as a left-hand value, cue the previous talk, then it will actually call this routine instead, allowing us access to set it in. Okay, and it's a little bit complicated to understand how that inner bit works, but just know that it basically provides it as a left-hand value. Right? Whereas in Corinna, it's not doing that. It's kind of just functioning as what we'd see in a lot of other languages, just adding that method in that says set. And then the other one that it does a little different is it returns a copy of the object at the end. So you can then start chaining the sets. Okay, that's a personal style choice. All right. But again, this is how those are going to differ just a little bit in how they work. Another thing we talked about earlier, kind of in the hallway track, was you can actually in Corinna, you can have something be just a writer. There's no requirement to put the writer to also have the reader on it. And there's no real exact equivalent to that in Raku. I was trying to think of a way that I could do that, and I don't think there is. I mean, at best, you could say in fetch, you could toss an error if somebody in that function. As to when that would be useful, I'll leave that to your thought process. And so that's how we would do the setting, right? Corinna, just put the C in with the parenthesis, and Raku just with the equal sign. All right. Now, if we want to create one of these objects, right, we just use the new, okay, as a method. And in Raku, though, we still actually keep this bless, which you're not going to use anymore in Perl, is my understanding. So So we would say bless, and then we put in the actual values we want to initialize in Raku. In Corinna, it's just assumed whatever values you pass in as your named arguments in sort of that hash will create it. But you can also do the new, and I don't think this is actually, right, this is not quite yet available with the new phaser. That's intended to go out at some point. The idea there is you can capture the hash that's giving you your initialization values, and then you can do some modification to it. Let's see. And really what it's closest to is what we have in Raku, which is the build. And the build in Raku takes whatever values you've grabbed in from new, which may or not be present because new is auto-generated in the background, and allows you to then sort of muck with them for the final setting of things. And that's, I think, the actual way that new is going to work when it gets done. Once an object's been created, right, and that would be done after these two phases, we have another method that can get called, and in Raku we call it tweak. And in Corinna they call it adjust. Why the difference? I don't know. No, Ovid had a good discussion as to why he called it adjust. He wanted to emphasize that it doesn't quite function the exact same way, and it's true because in Raku it is a method, and the way it is being implemented in Corinna is as a phaser rather than as a straight up method. So there are some ways that it's different, and that's the main reason that he said he wanted to have a different name for it. But the idea here really is, okay, I have my class, I've set it up with my initial data, right? I've dumped it into those attributes or field variables, and now I can do some other modifications to it, but knowing that it has already been fully instantiated at that point. And again, no, it just is available. I don't know why I left that in there. Yeah, that's why I was skipping. Again, Ruth. Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of copying and pasting of slides here trying to. Oh, he said adjust has been implemented. Yeah, adjust is in there. That's my leaving too many bits. Yeah, is Ruth's fault. All right. So what next do we have here? There's some other things that we can do with our field variables, right? So again, I can have it just set up as my default one. It doesn't really do much. But instead of just making things available for reading and writing, we can also adjust how they're done in the creation process. So one of them is I can define it in Corinna as being a parameter, which means when I do that new, in this case, if I said, new and said F42, when this is created, F will have the value of 42 within that. However, if I gave E a value and I passed E in that initial hash, nothing. I'm not going to do anything because I've told Corinna, hey, E is not going to be set up through that new method. Okay? Pretty much the same thing happens in Raku. With this one where I have that E, nothing's going to happen to it. But if I put in is built is required, then it will. Actually, all I need is built, but parameter the param here in Corinna requires you to have it. So the equivalent here in Raku, I have to add in the required bit. Okay? And we would do this in Raku the same way. Just say new and pass in our hash. But there's a lot of different options here. And so you'll see here a little bit of the philosophy difference between the two with this next bit of the equivalence. And so you can see we have the parameter. The way parameter works in Corinna is, again, you must have this value and it will set it in. Whereas in Raku, the way the default was, if I just put my dot with the accessor, that would be what gets us in as some sort of a parameter, but also makes it a reader. And if I want it to be required, then I put in the is required, or I put in is built if I don't want it to be publicly accessible. I just want it to be in there. So there's a couple of different equivalencies here. And again, little difference there of how you go. So if you're going between them, just be aware they're not going to work exactly as the other one. All right. So now we've got another one here, which is they call it the, of our default values. Sorry, I'm skipping slides here. Default value, pretty simple in Raku. I just say equals and then whatever. And then in Corinna, I can say, okay, I've got my parameter, but I can also say equals and then whatever I want it to be, its default value. Here, actually, Corinna's got a little bit more features in it because I don't have to use the equal. I can use the defined or, right? Or some of the other options within that. Whereas in Raku, our only option is just equal, right? At the moment, at least. There's some other stuff you can do here as well. Yes? Yeah.
The only thing is equal, but that equal could be a subroutine or a block or something else that does something more complicated.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah. Oh, so he said if you, in like Raku, I could do, instead of just doing the 0, I could put in a block that returns some value that's a little bit more complicated. And the answer is yes in that one. But at least, and there's also some more complicated things you can do here in Corinna, for instance. For that parameter, if I don't want, like maybe I want my internal value to be, just like a very succinct, 3-character variable name, but I want my interface that people are actually using to call in to have something a little bit more descriptive. You can actually put in parentheses in that param. You can say colon param parenthesis, and then maybe instead of J here, we say, justification, right? And maybe it's a formatting one. And so you can put in a true, justification, true, false, whatever. And again, we can't do that in Raku, but the way we would handle that in Raku is in that new method, we could capture in those names, and then in that blessed, then when we do that conversion for it. So they can approach the same issues just from different angles. Then the next thing that we have here is what's called common, and it is not yet implemented in Perl at the moment. And the idea here is sort of a variable that exists at the class level, but not in each, just one copy of it for all instances of the class to have it. And in the case of Camelia, in Raku, right? These are packages, so you just put in a my variable, and there it exists in the package, right? And we can have both my's and ours. In Corinna, it's not been implemented yet, and we were having a discussion earlier as I was writing this. Sort of the question is, well, what would be the difference? Because Corinna, these are still packages in Perl. So what would be the difference between saying field k common and just my k? I'm not sure. And this is, I think, as we were saying, why it maybe hasn't been fully yet implemented, because what would be the difference? Should there then be a distinction if there's not actually a practical use case differentiation? And then same thing, I'm not sure how this would be if you could do the reader comment. I don't know if that's actually valid or not for Corinna, or if it's intended to be. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe if Ovid were here, does he have his passport? I don't know. That's probably... Anyway, if we wanted to reference these in Raku, we just do like our normal package access, just do the double colon. All right, inheritance. Okay, this again, with Corinna, just say isa, and then put the next one in there. But Raku has a little bit of a difference here in that we allow for multiple inheritance. And Corinna does not. Maybe it will in the future. We don't know. But again, the idea here was for Corinna, start small. Single inheritance, much easier to do, much simpler. And then if somebody decides that they really need this multiple inheritance and enough of a use case and justification can be made, it could be added later. But once you've had it, it's very hard to remove it. Okay, so Raku went ahead and just said we're going to try it. And again, not yet implemented, no multi-inheritance in the Corinna side. Also, we're going to have interfaces. Yes, go ahead. No, plain is, yeah. Single inheritance. Oh wait, sorry, it should have just said, again, Ruth, where are you? It should have said just no multi-inheritance. Yeah. It's this that's supposed to say not yet implemented, which it does. Okay. This is why I'm just going to we'll just re-record this tomorrow. Okay. There's enough little mistakes here. I think I'll do that. So we have the interfaces, or roles, as both languages are calling them, and they're using the same keyword, does. What? There might be more. All right. So we've got the interfaces. This is planned. It has not yet been implemented, but the idea is you'll just say does and function, same as kind of any other kind of interface style mechanism. The next one is versioning. And I once again have a not yet implemented text here. It has absolutely been implemented. So just ignore it. Ruth, once again, her fault. What? Yeah, we're at 8 times now. So you just add in your version number right after the class. In the case of, yes, maybe that could be what we put in on the post-production. Just have the little, the little counter. Yes. From what I saw in all the examples, you just put the number. Yeah. So in the older versions of Corinna that I saw, it basically kind of followed the model of everything else. You would have colon, version, and then the number within that. But he changed that in the final implementation, which was just the number after it. Yeah. Yeah. So in Raku, on the other hand, we've got we have our version string that we can do. But we also have some others that we can do, which is the author of it, and an API number, which API, I only know one major package that has really muddled with the API numbers. But the idea is that you could potentially have the same package just done by 2 different people. But if their APIs are identical, then you can substitute them. What?
It's just a package, so you can't do it at the same time.
Well, the idea is this is actually in Raku, these are parts of the name. So you should be able to have the 2 different ones. Oh, yeah, in Perl, yeah. It would not. Yeah. All you got is your numbers. But you can have the 2 numbered ones. So you can't? Oh, you can't? Oh, okay. Yeah. Now, we have our MOP as well here. And this is kind of an interesting one. A quick example of how we can kind of play around with the meta-object protocol. A grammar in Raku is a class, but the backing workings is different than what we have in normal class, right? As things get loaded in, it just does stuff differently, and the way we represent it is with a different declarator. Instead of having class, we switch it to grammar, and then when Raku is processing everything in the background, instead of using how a normal class would do all this back-end stuff, it's instead using the grammar one. And this is one, playing around with that is not something you see a lot of, but there are 2 main modules that use this if you want to kind of see how they're doing it, which is Red, which is the database, main database module that we use, and Crow, which is the main web services one. My understanding is that mucking around with this is not yet supported, but is planned-ish. Yeah. What? Okay, yeah. So it's being played with, but not fully available for other people. I mean, in as much as you could use that one to play around with, but not official supported yet. Right? Okay. Yeah. So that's kind of it for what Corinna has available. Again, starting small. And so my kind of final thoughts here on Corinna is there's a lot of stuff people want, and maybe you'll get it later. In the meantime, couple things. You can start using the compact class feature if you want to start moving things over to it. It kind of provides a little layer between whatever you would have had in Moose or other ones to the objects. Start using it. Give feedback. Yes? Yeah, object pad. Do it. Yeah. We had a preview for a talk for tomorrow on using object pad. But yes, start using this as a. Are you grab? Are you jumping in? Okay. Go ahead and start using this. Give people feedback on it. Give Ovid and Leonard some support. Really thank them and everyone else who's been working on this. One of the things I've heard from them is they would like to advance more, but there's a little bit of concern that nobody's really using it. And I think this is going to ultimately, long-term, become a really good thing, net positive for Perl. But let's start using it, right? And very likely, this will be better with Project Ocean. Right? I don't know what the status of that one is, but yeah, some modules on CPAN. All right. Oh, so the question was, what is Project Ocean? This is the new type system, and more. I'm simplifying it greatly for the purpose of this. Yes. I know, but all right. We'll just let Chris jump in. He's more of the program.
It's not a type system. It's data checks. It happens at runtime. It's just a formalization of the normal checking that you'd already be doing. So hopefully you're doing it. I know at my work it's not always done, which is why I'm still employed. But I think it's called data checks on CPAN. It's one of Leonard Paul Evans's modules, and he's been integrating it with Object Pad and the other stuff as a way to test out the ideas and see what's there.
Right.
So play with it.
Not a type system. Yes. But as this can start getting used, I think it's going to become really great. And there's a lot of those other features that he wants to implement in. You can go look at a lot of the ones that they're kind of talking about doing. With Raku, if you've never used it, try it out. Okay, especially play with the meta object protocol. I've done a little playing around with it. I haven't got anything ready to release with it, but at least kind of seeing how that meta object protocol works. And right now, Raku already has a lot of what Corinna wants to have, and then some. Not saying it's better, it's different, right? Raku has the advantage, doesn't have to deal with the legacy, right? This is one of the big things. You don't want to change something and then have it break everything that came before it. Raku has that advantage. We can kind of do that right now. Our ecosystem isn't large enough. I say sometimes here, most of the time it kind of works like Corinna plans to do. And that shouldn't be very surprising because Raku was planned to be the next version of Perl, so that's kind of showing the ideas that people who were using Perl wanted to see. And those probably haven't really changed very much over time. But sometimes it does take a different approach. And the reason that I mentioned all this here is, what is the future going to be for it? As Corinna is being built out, as Raku is continuing to get developed, we've already been sharing lots of ideas. There's tons of cross-pollination. And so what is that new cross-pollination going to be? Right? Who is going to be doing the next big, as I think Liz Matt called it, the next big steal? And Ovid is not going to yell at her for calling it that, because he very openly admits that Corinna is heavily based off of Raku, but not entirely based off of it. And so as we each play with each other's systems, we can see what is working, what is not, and then, what do we want to see for the next one? And again, particularly for Corinna, because it's not all been done yet, you still have some opportunities to make those edits. So that is my little quick overview talk of Corinna and Raku's class systems. If anybody's got more questions, I think this is going to be a good hallway plus talk.
Right, so I saw that the uppercase new was not yet implemented, right?
That is mine. Is even still being planned?
I mean, if it gets implemented, it's probably going to be called adjust arcs. It's in Object Pad as adjust arcs, and it's the equivalent of build arcs. It just lets you
Yeah.
Oh, right, well, what I was wondering was right now, since you can't do that, obviously you would want to do an adjust if you actually wanted to do something else, right? Okay.
Correct. Yeah. So the question there was, just to confirm that new was not there. And in the current version of Object Pad, it's listed as adjust args. But again, that purpose is what am I taking in from the new, and then I'm going to just make some modifications before I actually assign in to the. Yep.
So you had mentioned that the types system wasn't
Not type
implemented.
system.
Or I mean, not type system. The types were check system were still being
Runtime check system.
Right. So on your slide, you showed like defining it as a type. One of the attributes, does that use like a type tiny or
The
create a type or?
For let's see, which one did I? So again, I think this is an older code because the ISA on the attributes is not implemented in Corinna at the moment, and that would be part of what goes in with Ocean. So again, not type, but we're checking that it's there.
It's
All right.
Thank you.